Hello, this is Rhonda Palmer from Indiana Wesleyan University in the Doctorate of Nursing Practice. I'm going to discuss the relevance to interdisciplinary theory, organizational structures, especially it has to do with nursing in the medical field. The first item I'd like to talk about is Frederick Winslow Taylor. He wrote a book in 1911 called The Principles of Scientific Management. He looked at steel workers and how they used the tools to do their job. What tool did they pick? The tool that they used, how did they use the tool? How did they share the tools with others? What this really looked at was the precursor for the assembly line or factory work. He believed in fair work for fair play. He believed there's only one right to do something. Think of our ER procedures or our code blue. There's a system, step by step, that goes through. Sort of like in a factory or assembly line. Then also, if you think about in an outpatient setting, how you see a patient, how quickly can you get them in, that process, the things that you need to ask in order, and then how quickly can you get them back out the door into the lobby and get them scheduled for a follow-up appointment. What it looked at was the better a person did with their tool that they had, the more productivity they had. The more productivity there was, better revenue for the company, which could be tied back into salaries for that employee or a bonus. The focus really is on the act of the job and not personal relations or how things are done. It leaves out the possibilities of what if. Things change in an ER room or an outpatient clinic. What if that process is interrupted? One of the questions that it didn't ask is, are you happy doing your job? When there's really only one way to do it, there's no flexibility. What he tried to do when thinking about this process was match a worker to a job. That was based on the interest of the employee and the capacity to do the job. Then you were to keep reassuring the worker to work efficiently. And then it said that managers are to be managers, staff are to be staff. This is a classical work, and that we can see that it has some direct bearing on how nursing concepts are in the hospitals and in outpatient. Our next one is called the Hawthorne effect. This was in a study that was done in 1924 in Chicago, Illinois. The theory bridged scientific management with human relations. How the study worked was they decided to look at the electric plant. They introduced different lights within the plant. And what they thought was the brighter the light, the more efficient a worker would be able to do their job. What they found out was that the light had nothing to do with the job. That if the worker thought they were being watched or observed, they did a better job. They worked harder. We can see this in evidence-based practice care with a patient and a family. Does a nurse do a better job if a family member's in the room? Or if there are repercussions or retribution for not doing a good job? Say, for example, as a manager, is there a pattern of monitoring the staff that may induce a paranoia type situation or symptom that actually interferes with good evidence-based care, where they're always on edge, always anxious, and often a lot of mistakes happen in that kind of care? Conversely, if a manager pays special attention to an employee, does this improve work performance and self-esteem? Meaning it wasn't just the lighting, it was that the attention was being paid to employees, so they stepped up to the plate, so to speak. It's really in all how the manager or a leader conducts themselves with their employees. It's all about relationships, and it's not about systems. The next one is Henry Fayol. 1841 to 1925. His concepts were organizing, planning, controlling, and coordinating workers and managers. It was based on a design of a command structure with a definite span of control. Some of his 14 principles were like specialization. Employees have specific skills, for example, certified nurses. Their nursing skills will be reflected as a skilled, efficient set. Authority. This is where managers gave the orders, but also with that comes responsibility, and could the manager handle that? Discipline. It must be used in an organization, but he believed that there were different ways to do it. Unity of command. Only one boss. The group interest over the individual interest. Think about this in a scheduling process. Is it fair for one employee to have their pick of days off above the others in an outpatient clinic? Is striving to see the most patients can lead to an individual success, but not as a group. Problem comes when, for example, in an outpatient, when one employee, say for example an APN, is striving above the others and for whatever reason is taking out of the workforce and a patient needs something, often the care will be diminished because there isn't a group cohesion on care for that client. There's also one central command center. Now think about this as in our nursing stations. Then you have a scalar chain or scholar chain. This is a top-down organizational structure. This asks, where do I fit in the structure? Am I an executive level? Am I a mediator between managers and executive level? Am I in administration? Do I do education? Knowing where you fit in the company vision really has to do with that scalar chain. Where am I on the rung of that ladder? Then he talked about an orderly environment. This said that everything needed to be clean, safe, and everything in its place. Then we talked about equity of managers and how they treat their employees. Needed to have empathy, care, and discipline when it was needed. Then you had this principle of stable personnel. This said that you were to minimize employee changeovers too often, probably no more than 30% in any given year. Then you had individual initiatives. This is different from group interest over individual. This looked at an individual initiative where you were given some authority, some freedom to make new rules, best practices, and design the work areas based on what was needed. And finally, when we look at the dates that he was born and died in, you see during the 1916 to 18, we were looking at the World War I. Many of his concepts have to do with military linguistic definitions. And so finally you see esprit de corps, just like in a military, say for example in a boot camp. When you think about this thing in nursing, think about this, the buddy system. Promoted having someone to follow with you during the day. Needed a motto. Team buildings. These all 14 principles look to how to make a group cohesive to give better care. Let's look at Max Weber in the bureaucratic theory, 1864 to 1920 in Germany. He believed that promotion was based on merit and interpersonal rules. He believed that you should reduce ambiguity and diversity in organizations. He believed in a formal organization. It was the individual was not to be emphasized. The importance is with rules, titles and offices. When you look at the rational or legal authority, this is what we talked about with rules and offices. There was an obedience to the title or the office. This is where you had a legally established board of directors with obedience to the rules that were to be governed by the corporation or the mission. Then you had something that was called traditional authority. These had to do with dominant figures like elder, queen, manager. Also, when you think about this in nursing, you think about head nurse or chief operating officer. Then you had a charismatic authority. This was someone who had personal charm, that others obeyed them just because they believed in them. Um, when we talked about these different kinds of authority, he looked at how a formal hierarchy should have a chain of command with each one of these authorities. Well, when we looked at the rules, we also get the idea from our standard operating procedures that we use. And then finally, he also said that no personal items should be in hospitals, offices, or areas of work. But the detraction from this is it lost that actual personal part of nursing, if we look at it this way. And so it was too rigid. There was no room for intuitive-based learning or acting. Then we go to modern organization theories, like the contingency theory. This is where chaos can be actively managed. Conflict's good. There's no best way to organize anything. Paul Lawrence and Jay Lorsch in 1967 talked about that no companies are the same, so each needs its own structure. Let's think about this like a trauma level 1 center and how it's run, and how that also interacts with, say, outpatient clinics in a suburban area. The level trauma 1 center has its own way that they do things, its own speciality. It handles traumas of any kind, often multiple traumas. There's always a surgeon on board. The OR is available at all hours of the day. You also have a hospital that has to be the referral center for outgoing medical units. Each of these has their own way they do business. So take, for example, when 9/11 happened in Manhattan, chaos ensued. What was considered a regular organizational care in hospitals changed abruptly. It took on a new dimension. And therefore, the conflict that ensued was good. The chaos was able to be actively managed, and a lot of nursing-based care came from it. One of the other things that came out of this was what was called the least personality scale outcome questionnaire. And you were to think of the person that you worked with that you disliked the most, or that you liked to work with the least. Then there was a set of questions, and you were to answer the questions on how you perceived that employee. Were they friendly, distant? Were they warm, boring, quarrelsome, inconsiderate, kind, sincere? Then there was a score at the end. And based on your perception of that employee, really showed how you were as a coworker. This was used quite a bit in structuring businesses. It has fallen out of some disfavor because it was so subjective. Let's look at general systems theory. This was Ludwig von Bertalanffy. Don't say that too fasty. 1901 to 1972. He introduced in the late 1950s a theory that small changes in one area may cause a large ripple effect in another area, and that's how big change occurs. He said that the idea of a general systems theory was to be functionally interconnected with one's peers, managers, directors, patients, other facilities, community. That everyone needed to be treated with respect because they're humans and they're not tasks. You could see this as nursing could take on a life of its own with great joy and respect and admiration, and therefore that's conveyed to the patients. His theory also worked to close the gap among economic and racial groups, especially poverty. Let's think in that sense. Let's think about this. The level 1 trauma center is often in a downtown area. It has different ethnicities, cultures, the rich, poor, middle class, invalids. And then the suburban clinic may handle a specific one type of economic population or ethnic population, and how those two work together is important. So, for example, how a client who comes into the ER, level 1 trauma unit, severe injuries, they're taken care of and they're discharged back to an outlying community mental health center or primary care center. And how those two systems interact, the level trauma 1 and the outpatient clinic, has a lot to do with seeing the client not as a system, how the things worked in each area, but more as a personal. So what he said was that organizations need to be humanistic, not robots. And therefore, when you looked at them from a humanistic point of view, things did a better job, or things worked out better. Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin came up with the change theory. He was born in 1890 and passed away in 1947. He had 3 ideas: unfreeze, change, and refreeze. What he talked about was unfreezing a status quo. This is an idea that needed to be changed, and it needed to be unfrozen. So you go about a process of destabilizing it. He had many ways to do it, but what he said is once that begins and the change starts and transition begins, behaviors actually change. And then when you get to the point that you see that the transition has almost come completely to its end point, you refreeze that new habit and it becomes the new status quo. One of the problems with this was that people often accepted the new status quo grudgingly and worked to destroy it from then on, creating more chaos. It also forced change on other people. And often when the employees saw that the new frozen idea or status quo they didn't agree with, they would actively pursue to dismantle it. And often that was not a system as much as it was a person and their ideas. And so a lot of chaos ensued and a lot of hurt feelings. And often that process required a new unfreezing. Let's look at Peter Drucker, 1909 to 2005. He wrote a book on the management challenges for the 21st century. One of the things he said is efficiency is doing things the right way. Effectiveness is doing the right things. He believed that one must change or will not survive. That a policy needs to be changed for a change to occur. And that you need to start a new policy of systematic innovation. And once that begins and the process is started, you start pilot studies to see if it's feasible. He also believed that change comes about by outsourcing or decentralizing groups, which is opposed to some of the other theorists that we looked at that needed a centralized group, like a nursing station, if you would think about it. How this happened is, think about it in nursing here, where you decentralize a group, where you have, instead of nurses at a nurse station, perhaps now you have nurses with rolling computers that go from room to room. You have them broken up into the nurses in certain quadrants based at certain rooms, 3 or 4 at a time. It also looked, if you could think about this in outpatient, when you decentralize a group like outsourcing, one of the things that you could do is, say for example with APNs, you can move say if you've got a few facilities, you move an APN from one facility to another. So you decentralize the group in their area. One of the other things, though, that didn't work so well when they found out once they made the study and how things could be run it more efficiently, is that not as many workers were needed as one might think. The emphasis in his theory was on the goal and not on the product. So managers started looking for basically the ideal employee. because of the initiative that was given. So if a manager started a process, you found out that it was feasible, often it was how that process was done that was most important. So the employee that did the best in that process was the ideal employee. This kind of had a problem where the other staff would look at that ideal employee, and then the manager would look at that ideal employee, and the manager would base the other staff on that ideal employee. That striving to reach a goal like that actually was shown to hurt a product or a facility, because often any means was used to accomplish the goal, but the product or the patient could be hurt. It did work to find ways for the staff to have more control over their own work area, meaning they were more skilled at it, they knew what they were doing. He also said that employees are not the expensive part of an organization. So thinking about in the hospital organization, nursing staff should not be seen as the most expensive part. They should be seen as the asset and a valuable resource. Then again, when we were talking about decentralizing power, this gave more control of daily habits to employees out where they were. He also developed something called SMART, SMART, which stood for Special, Research, Achievable, with Realistic, and a Time-Bound Continuum. From this, I guess we could look at nursing as in right dose, right time, right amount, right way, right patient. Delivering a product was to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. As a manager, as discussed before, he believed that ideas should be discussed first, then the goals. That good communication was needed. Everyone must improve manager-employee relations, and that there needed to be more self-directed activities rather than boss-directed activities. Let's look at X and Y theory by Douglas McGregor, 1906 to 1964. The X theory said that employees don't like to work, they need coercion, and they need threatened, but at the same time they want job security. This could be where managers or staff may believe that with a job like this, only money and promotion can make me do a job. And that doing this by favoring an employee really would bring about a good work ethic. Managers sometimes may use this method if they cannot motivate an employee beyond what they're actually doing. But this is usually a short-lived gain, and really doesn't change continuous work habits, and other employees may strive to overtake that preferred employee and begin to unseat them from that pedestal and create dissension among the groups. Why was a different theory? Douglas McGregor said, well, in some organizations, when we think about employees, you should see work as play and enjoy it. That threatening wasn't necessary. That good work comes from being fulfilled. That employees can take on responsibility and thrive in the environment if the environment is alive. Y says that the staff should have their own self-control and need much less managing, and that managers would have more time to do the job that they need to do, that it would increase self-esteem and motivate employees, and actually it would increase more autonomy, say for example in the nursing role. If we think about from the early 1900s theories that we were looking at, classical, where there was more control, task-oriented, specific job description, timeline. This looks at more autonomy for, say for example, for a nurse. When we think about the APN model, this really comes home where APNs have autonomy over patient care with a collaborative document or collaborative work with a physician. Um, the Y model really is enjoyed by employees. It brings about a cohesive group, a fun, um, and it has been shown to increase the workload uh, effectiveness by creating a better way to manage a situation with less effort. When we want to think about X and Y's theory that we just looked at, X is you need coercion, you threaten. The Y said you don't need that. You can give employees better stability on their own. Then you came up with the Z theory by William Auchie, 1943 to current. This is the blend of the X and Y together. He based his tenets on what he saw from Japanese business systems that were based on a clan structure, family structure, where employees were in a business for long periods of time. That trust was important, loyalty, commitment was informal, opinions mattered, teamwork was desired, lots of discussions on processes and outcomes. Everyone was given skills development according to their job description. Unions were often encouraged. He said also don't lose or gain large workforces in a short amount of time. So what he believed in was performance was to be methodical and over a period of time, and that the salary was based on that time period. And then to check and recheck that things are correct. This theory has kind of fallen out of favor with in the 1990s and early 2000 year era because the Japanese economy tanked. So some of the businesses quit using the model. For nursing, we can see that this is applicable because we are looking at human behavior among peers, trust, loyalty, commitment, having your opinion valued and matter, working as a team, lots of discussions, not this top-down approach where something comes down the pike, it isn't discussed, these are the rules, and then we work on it. Of course, skills development, especially as when you think about nursing with certification for nurse educators, researchers, APNs, critical care nurses, like in the trauma unit, outpatient, even with your medical assistants who are now having certification. Skills development is very important in teamwork. And then most effectively, when I was looking at these theories, was don't lose or gain large workforces. Nursing does have a trend of working in an area, say for 2 years and then moving on. This theory really looks at staying where you're at and progressing through, developing a commitment to your job, teamwork with other groups, skill development, what you're doing, and staying where you are. And then your salary is based on that over time. I thank you for attending this service on management. Any specific questions that you have or may arise may be found in the book that most of this was taken from, Philosophies and Theories for Advanced Nursing Practice by Butts and Rich, 2015, pages 339 to 353. I thank you, and this is Rhonda Palmer.